Okay, so we're going to pull it back together because our time, unfortunately, is very limited, but you can see actually just how in a very short period of time, actually, it's pretty effective to get a lot of things done. So I'm going to call on my Tyler model team. So just as a reminder, the steps again was, stating those very specific and measurable kind of objectives, selecting the learning experience. We call that our kind of data dump or brainstorming of that potential ideas, and then organizing it. So for us, we actually just labeled it 1, 2, 3, 4 based on, what we brainstormed, and then the evaluation. So I'm going to let Joseph take over.
So our project here was teaching basic life support providers. Oh, sorry. teaching basic life support providers how to assist a paramedic in an RSI scenario. So our learning objectives by the end of the session was to demonstrate strong bag valve mask use, the ability to assemble all the end-tidal CO2 and all the equipment, consistently recognize correct medications, and be the second person to verify the correct medication, correct dose, and the 5 R's that we would go through for all of our medications. And then we went on to learning experiences. So for the learning experiences, we broke it down into bag valve mask use, and we had 5 categories for that. A didactic period in the beginning for number 1, then teaching them to correctly assemble all of our equipment, a slow, fast, slow kind of demonstration, then some psychomotor practice, and then troubleshooting problems at the end. And then the second one we broke down was meds, and we started with identifying the different meds, breaking them up by, paralytic versus sedative, and what paralytics to use in what scenario. Then we went to med math, then a psychomotor component. What did we do then? A mega code, and then some case scenarios and documentation. And then we came back and we said our evaluation at the end would be like a mega code and then some debriefing.
Yeah, so you see how in just like 12 minutes, that's actually a very robust kind of curriculum that actually is very thorough, kind of very logical in the way they're going to learn it, but also practice and how we're going to evaluate it in the end as well too. So having a team doing the curricular development actually is key because you can really be creative about it.
Okay, so Jacob, lead us off with backwards design.
All right, so the backwards design has the 3 steps. The first one is identifying the desired results. So the curriculum we chose to design was teaching residents the 3-point compression test for DVTs, the ultrasound exam. So we came up with 3 things that our residents needed to know, and that would be knowing the 3 points and knowing the anatomy. In our this curriculum asks that we identify something like the enduring knowledge as well as the familiar knowledge, so we figured that it would be good for the residents to always remember where to put the probe, and then just be relatively familiar with the names of the veins, right? If you forget the names of the veins, you could probably still do the exam. Then they also need to learn the method, like how to compress properly to make sure the vein goes away, and then know how to apply the test and know the sensitivity and specificity and everything of the test. So then the second step is determining the assessment evidence. And so we decided that in OSCE, doing a hands-on testing experience would be the best way to determine if the residents were able to do the exam or not. And then also looking at saved and logged scans to ensure that they are doing the test properly in the clinical setting. And then finally, the planned learning experiences and instruction is basically designing the whole curriculum. And so we decided that it could start with just a short lecture to make sure everyone has the basic idea of how to do the test, and then do a simulation and have them practice doing it on each other or standardized patients, and then take them, take them to real patients in the clinical setting, have them practice there too, and then continue to review their scans as they continue to practice when they are just in the department. So, yeah.
Yeah, so just the interesting aspect of this curriculum, because we established early that not only we wanted, the cognitive piece to this and the psychomotor, but we actually wanted to see measurable results in the clinical setting. Because we identified that early, we decided in the last step to incorporate a clinical component to it, like real-world scan images. Whereas if we were necessarily going through this stepwise, step 1 through 6, we'd end with maybe we just did the simulation OSCE and we never went to the real world. And when we're going to evaluate and we say, oh, we'll look at real-world scans, it may not necessarily translate, because you can teach someone in the sim and they may be good to do it in front of you, but they're not actually doing it in the hospital for whatever reason. Maybe those ultrasound machines are different, or they're not getting supervised, or they're not comfortable in front of actual patients. And so you won't see those results carry because you didn't introduce that as an educational strategy. So since we identified those results as valuable early on, we modified to incorporate a real-world scenario early. And so that's an advantage to something like this.
So let's just take it home, shall we? My spices group.
So we were the spices group. We thought that the spices model would be a good conceptual framework for a diversity, equity, inclusion curriculum. And so we started off with student-centered. And so what we discussed there was because DEI is such a broad topic, and our groups are very diverse, within the country and where they come from. Having a student-centered approach by sending out a survey to figure out what topics meant most to them might be a good way to sort of understand what they wanted to learn about specifically within that realm. Then we talked about, once those topics were identified, there's some foundational knowledge that's associated, so getting to the problem-based section of it, either having them do a flipped classroom model where they'll learn before, or have a didactic session followed by a problem-based learning session where we could address some of the affective components of the curriculum. Integrated, so this would be something that would be longitudinal, and so if you were to integrate this into a current residency structure where there's current didactic sessions, having faculty members incorporate a slide, for example, of demographics or socioeconomic status within their particular lecture, and also discuss healthcare disparities where they can within their specific lectures for each content lecture. Community-based, so having a community-based component to it, so integrating some of the clinical care that they might be providing with certain areas of the community. So one of the things that was brought up was perhaps replacing a clinical shift with a shift at a student-run free clinic that is already being integrated, for example, at the medical school level. With respect to electives, we talked about working, for example, with the C-suite on their diversity, having an elective where they could be working with leaders at the C-suite or at the level of the medical school in the dean's office, for example, and that could be an elective structure. And then systematic, how are we going to assess them, and building it into already assessment means that we might have. So some institutions might have simulation assessments, and perhaps putting in a topic that's integrated within DEI into that, so that they're also being assessed on their communication skills within the construct of what you're normally doing for your assessments. So that's how we integrated that into the SPICES model.
So I just want to thank my wonderful group, because they just tackled something that's really big, and I swear he's just got a curriculum ready to go back to tell his PD that I got it, we're doing this. And the biggest thing with the SPICES model is that, again, we were not following everything that was innovative and like hot, but we also were like, we're not sticking with the traditional for every little aspect either. So it was taking a little bit of both. So in summary, Shri?
Okay, so just finishing up. So there's no one best, one size fits all model. And it's good to know the different kind of models and the benefits and pitfalls. We talked about Kern. I mean, this is the comprehensive, the tried and true. But know that you need to go through all the steps, and it's iterative, and you should keep going back. And it's a living being that should always be growing and changing over the time. Then we discussed some of the other techniques. Each one is slightly different. If you have a very specific measurable outcome, not too robust, a backward design would be good for that. It wouldn't be good for a large longitudinal, you have to teach a whole residency curriculum. You wouldn't do backwards design, but if you need a more robust thing, you can consider the SPICES, which will be more integrated over time. But if you're teaching grade school and you want the tried and true method that's been done for the past 100 years, then you got the Tyler model. But overall, to be a good educator, it's not just being good at one thing, but having a lot of different tools in your armamentarium so that you can tackle different situations that may arise.
And this is just the QR code. So if you want a link, this actually has the Kern model and all the other advanced models that we talked about, plus the worksheets on there as well too. So if you wanted to, like for example, teach this at your home institution and kind of spread the word, feel free to use that as well, because we made it a kind of living document on Google Docs. We'll stick around for any questions, but thank you guys for your participation.